For 4 years, Clark and I had been together when last March, Dad stopped sending my monthly allowance. Just silence when I called asking about it, no explanation. When our lifestyle changed, Clark noticed immediately. In a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, we had been living comfortably. With Dad's monthly transfers, I paid rent and most expenses while what he could, Clark contributed. Twice a week we went out for dinner, took weekend trips, and about money, never worried. Everything shifted when the money stopped coming. To cover our bills, I started picking up extra hours. We find a cheaper place, Clark suggested, but to downgrade our life, I refused. While figuring out what was happening with Dad, I used my savings to maintain our routine. Almost immediately, Clark began acting differently. Expensive restaurants he stopped suggesting, and at home more often, started cooking. Our gym membership he canceled and we could run outside instead, he said. Every item that wasn't absolutely necessary he questioned when I bought groceries. Being supportive and practical, I thought he was. With budgets and planning, Clark had always been good. To temporary circumstances, I assumed he was helping us adjust. To make things easier, I appreciated his efforts. Clark became increasingly distant over the following months. Staying out later and coming home without much explanation, he started. About his day when I asked, short answers he gave and the subject changed. For weekends, he stopped making plans, and when I suggested activities, seemed irritated. To stress about money, I attributed his mood changes. More hours we had both been working and together, spending less time. Once I figured out the situation with Dad, I thought everything would return to normal. To our new circumstances, Clark just needed time to adjust. His coworker Avery, Clark started mentioning frequently in July. A new car she had apparently bought and expensive vacations, was planning. By her lifestyle, he seemed fascinated and in conversations constantly. Brought her up. Annoying but not suspicious, I found it. Multiple times throughout the summer, I tried calling Dad. Occasionally he answered, but brief, kept conversations. Busy, he said he was, and back, would call me, then never did. Asking if I had upset him somehow, I left voicemails. Why the monthly transfers had ended, he never explained. With my family situation as months passed, Clark grew more impatient. Whatever was broken, he said I needed to fix instead of our savings depleting. Of being too proud to admit mistakes, he accused me. On the couch after arguments about money, he started sleeping. Except to complain about expenses, Clark barely spoke to me by October. In front of the television, he ate dinner and on his phone, spent evenings. Something special for my birthday in November when I suggested we plan celebrations anymore we couldn't afford, he said. To save money for a birthday dinner, I started working additional shifts. At the restaurant where we had our first date, I made reservations. About the plan weeks in advance, I told Clark, and to go, he agreed. To reconnect and celebrate together, I was excited, and I waited at the restaurant for 20 minutes past our reservation time. Saturday evening arrived. For anything important, Clark was never late. Where he was, I texted asking but no response. Received. If I wanted to order, the hostess kept checking while around us. Other couples filled tables. Into the restaurant carrying his phone, his brother Thomas walked. Our table he approached and without greeting me, set his phone down. And Clark's voice came through the phone speaker. He hit play. Tonight I'm not coming. For your money this whole time, I've been using you. Your dad cut you off, but so anymore, there's no point. To love you was exhausting. 4 years of pretending. With someone who's actually worth my time, I'm all ready. Me again, don't contact. About how pathetic I had become without family money, the message continued with details. For months he had been seeing with someone, Clark mentioned, and with her, was moving in. With my father I should have fixed things, he said, instead of like we were poor, expecting him to live. Every word, every person in the restaurant could hear. Mid-step a server stopped and stared. Mortified, the elderly couple at the next table looked. What was happening? Children at nearby tables asked their parents. When I looked at him in shock, Thomas shrugged. Everyone heard it, he said to make sure. My purse I grabbed and without saying anything walked out. From Clark with a text listing items he would pick up from our apartment, my phone buzzed. Publicly because he thought I was now worthless without Dad's money, Clark wanted to humiliate me. To deliver the message in the most devastating way possible, he sent his brother. Exactly how he felt about me, he wanted everyone to know. The most important question, but this idiot never asked. Why Dad had really stopped sending money, he never wondered. I had screwed up, he just assumed and as fact accepted that. What happens when you humiliate someone whose father was just checking if you actually loved his daughter? Now Clark gets to find out. Oh my god, you guys, first update. Insane has been the response to my post. At all your comments calling Clark a gold digger, I'm literally crying laughing because what this loser turned out to be, that's exactly than I originally posted, but it gets so much worse. After I walked out of that restaurant, so feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare, I drove home. So calculated and cruel the whole thing was, that message having his brother deliver. Everyone could hear, so. Some next-level psycho behavior that's coming I obviously never saw. To our apartment when I got back, like some kind of thief, Clark had already been there. Gone was half his stuff. Packed up was his PlayStation. And that I bought, he took the expensive coffee maker. On the counter, with a list of more crap he wanted to come back for, there was this note with he planned to show up, specific times, where it gets absolutely insane, but here's. At this note, trying to process what just happened while I'm sitting there staring. With texts, my phone starts blowing up. From Clark, not from his mother. If I'm okay in saying she heard what happened, his mom, Marie, is texting me asking. Thank God. I'm thinking, oh, from his family has some decency, at least someone. Wrong. I'd been acting strange lately. She starts going on about how Clark told her and behind his back that he discovered I was seeing someone else. 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, I literally had to read these texts. That I cheated on him. This piece of had told his entire family about my affair that he'd found out. And in such a dramatic way, that's why he left me. Heartbroken and betrayed because he was. I'm some cheating girl who destroyed their precious son. So now his whole family thinks, and like he's the victim, they're all rallying around him. She is because she thought I was better than that. His mom is texting me about how disappointed and devastated but trying to stay strong. How Clark is. Literally shaking. I was so angry I was. Like my own family. 4 years of treating his family. And birthday parties and family vacations. 4 years of Christmas dinners. What I get, and this is. About why we broke up? Him lying to them so he doesn't have to admit for someone with more money. He left me. Clark immediately I called and probably thinking I was going to beg him to come back, he actually picked up. About his lies to his family instead, I started screaming at him. That it was easier for everyone. And this dude had the audacity to tell me if I cheated, his family thought, rather than the complicated financial stuff. Getting into. Too many questions about why he left me so suddenly. He said his parents were already asking, and about money problems, telling them would more drama, just create. To make me the villain, so he decided it was simpler so for his decision, his family wouldn't judge him. I should go along with it, Clark actually told me, because for everyone involved, it would make the breakup cleaner. I cheated if I just let his family think, he said. Asking questions they'd stop, and with our lives, we could both move on. On him I hung up and to tell them the truth, immediately started calling his family members. What, but guess. First, Clark had gotten to them. His dad, his mom, Thomas, Melanie his sister, the same story they all had. The cheater, I was. The heartbroken victim, Clark was. My side of the story and they weren't interested in hearing. Of my affair, his sister Melanie actually told me that Clark had shown them proof. Between me and a male co-worker apparently some texts that and twisted to look suspicious Clark had completely taken out of context. About projects, these were normal work conversations, but they were evidence of me being unfaithful. Clark had convinced his family. With his dad, Thomas, the worst part was talking. A great relationship with who I'd always had. At his daughter's wedding, this man had walked me down the aisle because traveling, my dad was. His bonus daughter, he'd called me and like part of the family, always made me feel. In my choices. And now he's telling me how disappointed he is in his son's heart. How I broke. About the restaurant, I tried explaining what really happened. About the voice message. For Avery about Clark leaving me, but about my lies and manipulation. Thomas just kept saying that Clark had already told them. That I might try to twist the story apparently. Clark had prepared them for the possibility to look better. To make myself. With being humiliated and abandoned. So now I'm not just dealing. A cheating liar, I'm dealing with an entire family that thinks I'm because then admitting the truth about why he really left. Clark decided it was more convenient. The thing, but here's. On I'm not. Clark didn't count. Who's going to just take this lying down, some helpless victim, and destroy my reputation with his family? If he wants to play dirty, then when you mess with someone who has nothing left to lose, he's about to find out what happens. In his little lie campaign, Clark had made one crucial mistake. To all our shared accounts, he'd forgotten that I had access and about what our relationship was really like. 4 years worth of actual evidence. About being betrayed while Clark was busy spinning his sob story. Of what had actually happened, I was gathering real proof. That I paid for most of our expenses. Bank statements showing. Together right up until the money stopped. Photos from social media showing us happy. About cheating, text conversations between us where Clark never once mentioned being suspicious. With Avery, the best part was when I found Clark's Instagram messages. Inside jokes, there were heart emojis, to meet up plans, all with me and pretending to be committed to our relationship while he was still living. A gold digger, so Clark wasn't just. Who had the balls to accuse me of cheating? He was a cheater to his own infidelity and his real reasons for leaving, cover up. To his mom, Marie, I sent screenshots of these messages, of what had actually happened along with a very detailed explanation. In that restaurant, I told her exactly how her precious son had humiliated me. Behind my back, how he'd been seeing Avery, and to avoid admitting he'd left me for someone he thought had better financial prospects. How he'd made up the cheating story. I was obsessed and delusional. Marie's response was to tell me and stop harassing their family, that I needed to move on, that I might become unstable after the breakup. She said Clark had warned them, and for him and Avery, try to cause problems. Perfectly. That's when I realized Clark had played this. Of my life, he'd not only stolen 4 years. Against me, he'd managed to turn his entire family, and who couldn't accept that the relationship was over. Paint me as the crazy ex-girlfriend. With these comments, second update. You guys are absolutely killing me, and because this story gets so much more insane, I need to tell you what happened next and actually turned out to be. I'm still processing how evil Clark against me. So, after Clark's family completely dismissed all my evidence and called me delusional, like I was going crazy, I was sitting in my apartment feeling so completely that even people who've known you for years think you're lying. How do you fight against someone who's rewritten history? And the first thing she said was, but then my mom called me. To his family, we know what Clark did. And get away with it, we're not letting him. With Clark's parents for years, turns out my parents had been in contact. At family gatherings, they'd exchanged numbers. On Facebook, followed each other, the whole thing. About her poor son being betrayed by his cheating girlfriend. My mom had seen Marie's posts, and livid she was. To set the record straight, my mom told me she'd already called Marie directly, and absolutely explosive the conversation had been. On Clark's lies, Marie had apparently doubled down. About something like that, insisting that her son would never lie, and from the consequences of my own actions that my family was just trying to protect me. That made me simultaneously proud and terrified, so my mom did something. For dinner to discuss the situation like adults, she invited Clark's entire family over, and to the truth, get the crazy part, and here's to come, they actually agreed. Thomas, Marie, Vada, Melanie, even Clark's grandmother, who I absolutely adored. On Sunday evening, they all showed up at my parents' house, about raising a lying cheater, probably thinking they were going to confront my family. Like a war zone from the moment everyone sat down, my mom told me later that the dinner was. She was in me. Marie immediately started talking about how disappointed, and with her son's heart, how she'd trusted me. Into their family, Thomas was going on about how he'd welcomed me and by my actions, felt betrayed. For this, but my dad had prepared everything. He'd printed out social media screenshots, bank statements, Threads text message, from our apartment building, even security camera footage showing during the months he was supposedly being faithful to me when Clark had been coming and going. On the dining room table when my dad laid all this evidence, silent Clark's family went. Could be faked. Marie tried to argue that the evidence, but through the papers Thomas started looking and completely changed his expression. Between Clark and Avery, the Instagram messages were particularly damning. Before my dad stopped the allowance, there were hundreds of them going back months. To meet up when I was at work, heart emojis, plans, about having to pretend everything was fine at home, Clark complaining while his exit strategy he figured out, to leave me, but the worst part was a message where Clark told Avery that he was just waiting for the right moment, and like the bad guy that he needed to make sure I looked. So for abandoning a 4-year relationship so suddenly his family wouldn't judge him. Over her dad's shoulder, Melanie was reading and crying. She started. Something so cruel and calculated, she said she couldn't believe her brother had planned. Vad, Clark's grandmother, and saying just kept shaking her head. I raised, this isn't the boy, the real bomb. That's when my mom dropped. As a test, she told Clark's family that my dad had stopped the allowance on purpose when things got tough to see how Clark would treat me. Of Clark's motives for months, she explained that my parents had been suspicious and his true character wanted to see. If this was true, Thomas asked my dad directly, and everything my dad confirmed. Throughout the test, he said they'd been documenting Clark's behavior and then they'd ever imagined that his reaction had been worse. Again, Marie started getting defensive, that someone's relationship was manipulative and unfair, saying that testing. Immediately, but my mom shut that down by that they hadn't tested Clark's love, pointing out his character they'd tested, and over compassion he'd failed spectacularly by choosing cruelty. With Clark, then my dad played them the recordings of my phone conversations about my character where he'd been tearing apart, and then me bragging about how much better Avery was, being so vicious and calculating. Hearing their son's voice about for 4 years someone he'd claimed to love for his family was devastating. To admit they'd been wrong, but Clark's family wasn't ready. That even if Clark had handled things badly, Thomas started arguing about the family money situation. I should have been honest instead of a real crisis letting him think there was. That's when I lost. For their son's cruelty, I'd been sitting there listening to them make excuses, and anymore I couldn't take it. About how Clark had never asked me, I stood up and started yelling with my family what was happening. I'd screwed up, he just assumed, and like garbage started treating me. In front of strangers, I told them that their precious son had humiliated me, about why he lied to his own family, and to cover up his own cheating and gold-digging behavior tried to destroy my reputation, that I was being dramatic. Marie started yelling back, and for lots of reasons that relationships end. Made mistakes, she said maybe Clark had, but a monster that didn't make him. Her brother, but Melanie was done defending, about how quickly Clark had moved on with Avery, She said she'd always thought something was off, and why now she understood. To me, she apologized, and of how their family had treated me said she was ashamed. Clark's behavior. Thomas was still trying to find ways to excuse. About the money situation. He said maybe Clark had been confused and scared, and hadn't handled it, that we were all overreacting. He suggested, and in relationships that young people make mistakes. Really angry, that's when my dad got. A mistake, he said, that what Clark had done wasn't. Of manipulation and cruelty, it was a deliberate pattern that his true character revealed. That any man who would publicly